up and just sitting in the chair is so hard for so many people. Sitting down on the floor is so challenging. So it
Cutting
can
your
be,
toenails. I just had this
yeah,
conversation with my mother.
yeah,
She needs to go get a pedicure because I'm like, can't you just reach down and cut them yourself?
yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and the thing is, your body, adapts to the things that you are just maybe not thinking are important enough anymore. And I
mhm,
see that. And even from the perspective of what what I'm passionate about, the microbiome
mhm.
changes as we get older. In fact, Debbie, I don't know if you saw this, there was a news article about this woman who just died, 112, 115, something like that. And they were curious, scientists and researchers were curious, how did you live this long? And one of the things that they discovered was that this woman had the microbiome of an infant.
Wow.
Because the microbes change as you get older.
Hmm.
What happens when we are in our 80s and 90s? Most of us end up in assisted living, or we're kind of we will probably have dentures and things like that. We're not able to chew our food. All of that, exercise is limited, maybe sleep is compromised. And all of that has a role to play in the health of the microbiome and therefore the health of the individual.
Hmm. Before we get a little deeper into that, tell a little bit about who you are and what you do, what led you to focus on the microbiome and be passionate about it.
Absolutely. I think, like most of us practitioners, it's our own health that kind of leads us into this path, right? It's
Yeah,
not like I
right.
set about and saying, I'm going to find out everything I can about the microbiome. This is like many moons ago. I was really struggling with some gut issues and just here in San Diego, went from doctor to doctor, couldn't find a good answer, and it's not their fault. The research was very limited at the time. And so long story short, I this one day as I went to this doctor who kind of literally laughed at me and said, all the symptoms that you're talking about, we all have it. It's not a big deal. So in other words, just suck it up,
Normal.
lady. It's
Yeah.
just normal stuff because all my blood work was normal. So they didn't really, but I wasn't happy with that answer because I was the one struggling. I didn't feel like myself. I felt like, what the heck? These are the same foods that I was eating for so long, and I'm having some kind of a reaction to food. Why is that? I just became very curious, really, and kind of just I felt hopeless at that time. Looking back, I
Mhm.
thought, am I ever going to be eating like I used to?
Mhm.
And then I started doing some research, put my science background to work, and I discovered the microbiome. And it was just that missing part of the puzzle for me. I
Mhm.
was just fascinated that these trillions of bacteria in your gut are just orchestrating so many different things. They're not just bystanders. They really shift so many things in your metabolism, with your cardiovascular health, with your immune system, with your mood. So it's no longer where there are just one or two studies. There's so many studies pointing to that it it is prudent to pay attention to that.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I've talked to Dr. William Davis a lot, and I read his book a few times, a super gut book, and I swear I need to read it all the time. There's so much information in there and more coming out about the different bacteria. And he speaks a lot to the one bacteria, L. reuteri. Do you have
Mhm.
any bacteria that you find that help improve
Yeah.
our overall health?
Well, I think Faculobacterium pronitzi is one that is one of my favorite. Bifidobacterium, Lactobacillus, reuteri is also, they're all well-studied strains. So I think it is important for people to know that it's not just a probiotic, and when you're looking for a probiotic, the strain matters. So
Mm.
reuteri is a great one because you can easily make like a yogurt with it. It's fantastic for your oral microbiome. I actually have like a Reuteri supplement every day for my oral microbiome health.
Mm.
And Bifidobacterium has been well studied for anxiety and things like that. So I personally don't feel like we should focus on one or two. I think it's more about having,
Mm-hmm.
a well-balanced gut flora, just
Mm-hmm.
having, you don't want too much of any bacteria, because then, there's going to be havoc. So, a resilient microbiome is what we're looking for. And a resilient microbiome is one that can bounce back
Mm-hmm.
after you've had like a bout of, um, you know, I don't know, traveler's diarrhea or antibiotics, things like that. What if you can bounce back from that? It's a good indication that your microbiome is pretty resilient. And to have a resilient microbiome, you want to have species richness. That means you have different bacteria going to bat for you and really doing a lot of functions for you. And so, Debbie, some of the functions that these bacteria are doing behind the scenes is when we eat things like fiber, for example, we can't digest it. It goes directly to the colon, and in the colon, these gut microbes they feast on it, and they produce some short chain fatty acids.
Mm-hmm.
Bacteria like butyrate, and these are fantastic for decreasing, inflammation, weight loss, weight management, cardiovascular health, incredible functions. They produce vitamins for us, neurotransmitters. 90% of the serotonin, happy hormone, is made in our gut. And if we don't have the species making that serotonin, making that GABA, we're in trouble, right? Because then the gut is sending tons of messages to the brain and through the vagus nerve. So having these bacteria do that important work is so important. So that's the reason feeding your microbiome is way more important than just taking a probiotic or just taking one single strain of probiotic. So my whole book is just about that. Feed them and they reward you because there is a symbiotic partnership that we do have.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So when we talk about optimal, what do you find is an optimal healthy gut bacteria level microbiome?
So that's from a healthy American gut, just based on research. It's very sad. We don't have a lot of species. Our species are pretty much dying on us. If you compare us to, like, say, the traditional hunter-gatherer or the modern hunter-gatherer, the Hadza tribe, they have like 1,000 species, and we probably have about 300, 350,
Wow.
400, something like that. And in my practice, of course, this is anecdotal. I don't have the highest I've seen is 140, and the lowest I've seen is 22.
And what are you doing for testing the microbiome? What do you use?
I use a whole genome testing microbiome test, which is not diagnostic in nature, but it's a good function analysis. The client becomes very curious. They say, hey, these are the species that are within you. This is where you're at as far as diversity. These are the keystone species. Really, keystone species are important. Strains like Akkermansia, everyone's heard of Akkermansia, that really helps with weight loss and insulin resistance and things like that. So if they see that some of these really major players are missing or just, or really low, then something triggers in them. They start connecting to these forever guests. And that's how I look at it. It's like you're not alone. You have trillions of bacteria in there kind of orchestrating so much and helping you behind the scenes. And so it just makes it all more real for a client to see that.
Mm. Now, would you have a specific company lab test you used for microbiome or
Well,
another?
I use BiomeFX because they have whole genome testing, and I do
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, and I like the a good picture that I get from that.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some other things like Tiny Health is good for babies. I really enjoyed their test as well. So
What do you find with working with clients? what is the reason if they have low bacteria, low diversity? What do you think are you finding the reasons for that
That's a great
change?
question. I think one thing I've found across the board, because a lot of clients come to me for weight loss, right? And they've been on restricted diets.
Hmm.
They've kind of really cut out so many important micronutrients. I think we're at a stage now that we're talking so much about macros. There are actual wars going on about high protein, low fat, low carb, things like that. But I think it's the micronutrients that get lost in the shuffle. And micronutrients are very important because we don't make them. We don't make vitamins or minerals. Of course, our gut bacteria makes some of it, but it's coming from diet. So if we are on a very restricted diet, we are missing out on a lot of these wonderful compounds. So there's been a lot of research looking at this. There's one particular one that I find very interesting. They studied people who were on restrictive diets who lost a lot of weight but the weight came back. So the microbiome they noticed had an obesity memory. All of the other metabolic functions like blood sugar, hypertension, cholesterol, all of that came back to normal when they lost the weight. But just this obesity memory lingered. And they
Hmm.
found out it was because when people go on very restrictive diets, they're missing out on things like flavonoids and plant foods. And flavonoids are really good at when they metabolize, the gut bacteria metabolizes flavonoids, and they're great at extracting energy and metabolizing your food. So you lose out a lot when you're on restrictive diets. So that's the very first thing I tell people. Don't be on a diet. Don't be having like just a glass of celery juice every single day and expect magic. It's a little bit more nuanced than that, and start eating for your body. And
So
that's
it's
different.
yeah, but that's what you're working on is interesting correlation to have someone struggling with weight loss, metabolism issues perhaps, but they're seeing you and you're talking about their microbiome. Does that throw them off? Like, well, how does that have to do with my weight loss?
Yeah, it's a very well, the thing is, I'm pretty upfront. The very first thing I say, look, this is my philosophy.
Hmm.
I believe that these are all connected. I believe the microbiome has a role to play. I think the brain has a role to play. I think hormones have a role to play, especially for us women, and also the mindset. All of them play a role when someone is trying to lose weight. Um, but the choice becomes the client's. What would you like to focus on first? If they're interested in the microbiome, then I do have a lot of, professionals with the science background. They're super excited about the microbiome. So that's pretty much where they'd like to start. But then some people have food addictions, right? Emotional eating, things like that. So they're more interested in the brain. What role does the brain have to play? And my job is to connect the microbiome to the gut and the brain, because there's definitely a bi-directional conversation happening between the gut and the brain. More messages sent from the gut to the brain than the other way around, and kind of laying the research out to them so they make the choice.
Could you go into that a little more? I've been talking about that a lot, but just for explaining your theory on the gut brain connection, how you explain that to people.
Yeah. Well, uh, when a client comes to me, I can almost tell if there is a brain uh, issue because they're anxious, they're not able to focus, and I just kind of propose the idea that, did you know that the gut and the brain are connected? Would you like to learn more about it? If they say yes, then we start a conversation about um, why that happens, and largely because a lot of these neurotransmitters are made in the gut. And I say this on so many podcasts, but it still kind of is a marvel to me that serotonin, which is your happy hormone, is actually made in the gut. Is just
Yeah.
incredible to me, And so it's important. And the vagus nerve really is the one that meanders all around your digestive system and takes all the messages back to the brain. And when your gut is impaired, when your microbes, when you have fewer species, that can affect your mental health. There are so many strains today that are identified specifically for mental health, anxiety, sleep, stress, things like that. So,
Hmm. It's interesting. I've been going into a lot the vagus nerve and the brain to the gut, but I haven't gone back through the other side of dysfunction in the gut sending signals to the brain. So it's so fascinating how the body
yeah,
works. It's
it's
amazing.
amazing. And yeah, and that's why it's called the second brain, right?
Hmm.
Because we always say, I had a gut feeling. So it's way more than just a saying. We really
Hmm.
feel it in our gut. And when I see someone who's struggling with gut issues, I know it's connected to their brain as well. As soon as, I mean, and they've done research on things like IBS, SIBO, people with chronic gut issues almost always have a brain related issue as well, which is like low grade depression, or it could be anxiety. All of those things kind of show up as, and of course, if your gut is not happy and you don't know how your gut is digesting the food, I mean, of course, it's going to make you anxious, right? It just makes sense. Yeah.
I just had the song pop in my head. If you're happy, clap your hands. So we should just get our joy and happiness and gratitude is what I always find most of us were so high performing, high achieving, driven individuals that a lot of times to fix that wiring system of the vagus nerve,
uh,
both directions, is just
yeah.
chill out and just hang out on the beach, jump in the water. We just sometimes need to control, alternate, delete our computers as we do to our body and just reprogram how we react to things.
Yeah, and I think and even research is showing us, neuroscience is showing us that disconnect is so
Hmm.
important, because that constant stress loop can affect every aspect of your well-being, and it also affects your microbiome.
Yeah.
That we have seen that stress can actually deplete certain really beneficial bacteria in your gut.
Let's
And
go into that a little more as you're starting to say, sorry to interrupt, but that was my next question is going into what you said earlier about the impacts of chronic stress on your gut health, your
Yeah.
microbiome.
So chronic stress, I mean, based on studies, has shown that it really affects the HPA axis, it affects the gut-brain axis. It also affects, it causes that systemic inflammation in the body, that low-grade inflammation. And so I think really when I see someone like that who's highly stressed, I offer very simple solutions because you're already stressed. You don't want to add to
I
that,
know.
by saying, here's a protocol, just go after that. It's not
Hmm.
going to work for someone who's highly stressed. We do simple things like breath, for example, has really kind of really can cut down on stress, because breath is available to us. You could do a simple breathing, like B breath, or deep breathing. And even these small little shifts, you within like 2 days, the microbial composition changes. That to me is just so incredible that they respond to these little changes. And that gives you hope, right? It's not like you have to work on your diet for about 6 months to see one difference. It's just like one lifestyle shift. If you're sedentary, you're not, you're doing it much, even walking or doing some form of exercise can change your microbial composition. Sleeping, sleep is so important. If sleep is compromised, that means that your circadian rhythm is broken.
Hmm.
If you have erratic sleep patterns, you're not sleeping at the right time, you wake up too early or wake up too late, that can really confuse the microbiome as well, because the microbes also have a circadian rhythm just like ours. So um, even 1 or 2 days of sleeping poorly or sleeping too late can really decrease the microbial population, microbial diversity. And the next day, you can eat up to 500 calories more of junk food just from 1 day of one poor night's sleep. And I've actually seen that, Debbie, that if I sleep late, deadline, whatever, the next day, my brain is looking for junk food. The broccoli could be staring at me, but I don't want that. I want
Who wants
that
to overeat broccoli? Yeah.
donut. So this is true. I mean, it does happen because it's again the stress, of the lack of sleep and, inflammation. All of these play a huge role.
You mentioned the circadian rhythm of the microbiome. Do the bacteria have a sleep-wake cycle, you're saying?
Yeah, they have a
Do-
rest and digest, just like ours. That's why I think they respond to intermittent fasting,
Mhm.
because you have very clear cutoff. This is when I stop eating. This is when I start eating. So they like routine. They don't. That's why we see with people with impaired circadian rhythms, like shift workers, flight attendants, and it really does affect them, and their microbiome also is affected by it.
Hmm. That's crazy. So when we're looking at the full moon protocols people talk about for parasites active, or the microbiome, you find any research on just different times of the moon cycle related
Mm,
to microbiome?
I haven't. I haven't. It sounds very interesting, but I don't know of any research, with that.
Well,
Yeah.
you always hear parasites are more active in bacteria in our gut, or not necessarily bacteria, but I hear the parasites, you're supposed to do a detox around the full moon because the light,
Mhm.
and was it the serotonin draws them out, wakes them up more. So it's just always
Well, I
kind of
mean,
creepy.
it is. Well, I'm sorry, but I haven't come across any research, but
Mhm.
I do know from an Ayurvedic perspective that routine of eating at the right time is
Mhm.
something that's respected in lifestyle medicines like Ayurveda, where that high noon, when the sun is out, the sun's energy, that's when your digestive fire is at maximum, and to eat with the sun. So I think that's such a beautiful thought, to kind of respect nature, and I think the
Mhm.
full aspect is sort of related to that, I think, just about nature and the planets and that we're not alone in this universe.
Mhm.
There's just so many things that really affect us. So I think that's pretty nice. Yeah.
So what do you suggest? I'm sure everyone's a little different, but do you have a protocol for fasting to reset the microbiome, restore balance?
Mhm. Well,
Do
you're
you have?
right. Everyone's different, and
Mhm.
depending on a woman is postmenopausal or in cycle, certain intermittent fasting schedules could benefit them way better. But from a microbial perspective, I think as long as you have a certain thing, even 13 hours of fasting
Mhm.
is they've seen really does make a difference. So.
Yeah. We all used to, I think a lot of us, especially more the fit and active population and women, were fasting a lot more in, I don't know, 5, 10 years ago when it
Mhm.
got to be kind of, I don't know, not so trendy, but popular more in the
Yeah.
news to do 24-hour fast once a week and doing 16/8. And I never did a 3-day fast. That would seem too long for me to do when I was exercising all the time, but I could do a 24-hour fast once a week when it was my rest day from exercising. But it
Mm.
seems to be more and more research, especially for women to not that are athletic or active, not to do so much fasting, do more of a 12 hours, should be just normal eating window, not it's not really intermittent fasting. It should just be our normal eat 12-hour
Yeah.
window and 12-hour not eat.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense because you're cutting down you are in caloric deficit. There's only so many in meals that you can have within that parameter of the whatever schedule that you put forth. But I, from a mitochondrial perspective too, they've seen that caloric deficit really does help the microbiome. I mean, does help the
Right.
mitochondria, and the microbiome also really benefits from that caloric deficit in short periods, like a fasting mimicking diet, really kind of
Hmm.
cutting down for a week. And those kind of things are always fun to try. And again, it's so individual to the person. I wouldn't ever feel comfortable telling people saying this is the only way, because how would I know? It's your body and you have the wisdom to know what's best for your body. And yeah, so you try different things
Intuition.
and see what works. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, with the mitochondria, you're mentioning calorie restriction. We've talked about that. With is that more to do with AMPK pathway being activated to how's that the relationship of fat metabolism, AMPK, and mitochondria health as we age?
Yeah, that's the huge connection that we see. And of course, exercise is the big game changer when it comes to mitochondrial health. I mean, in fact, some of the research that I read about mitochondrial health really motivated me to exercise way more. I mean, of course, I always knew exercise is important for my for the microbiome, for your insulin sensitivity. I mean, it's connected in so many different ways, but when I did come across the research on mitochondrial health and exercise, it was a game changer for me. So, okay,
What
we're no longer just just doing a little walk around the block anymore. We're just doing strength training. I mean, I kind of, picked a few things for me at my where I am in my life and say, okay, this is important for my health.
what did you find is the best based on your research on mitochondria health for exercise
I
protocols?
I Well, I think it's both. I think it's both strength training and some aerobic, like a HIIT kind of workout. But I don't do a lot of HIIT. I just do, largely strength training. And
Mm-hmm.
being postmenopausal, I think it is so imperative that we build muscle and we retain the muscle as we age. One of the things that I see, Debbie, is that that's a huge sign of aging when people lose muscle. And so that and eating right, even as you age, making sure that you're getting all of these micronutrients, having good balanced macro approach is important for longevity, but more the health span, being healthy as you age. I
Mm-hmm.
think we all see our parents, right, aging, and we say, I don't want that to happen to me. Or for me, it's like medications. I have such an aversion to taking hundreds of pills to be okay. I would rather it comes from food. And I strongly believe that food is medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can just eat the right things for us, we can aspire for a healthy 70, 80, whatever. And it is possible. So.
Yeah, I think you're saying the same. What I feel is that we can't out supplement for the poor lifestyle habits and
Absolutely,
exercise,
100%.
nutrition. All right. I mean, I think so many people hear about, okay, I need to improve mitochondria health, AMPK, build muscle. I mean, there's so many supplements for longevity and aging that I don't want to take
Yeah,
20 different things, and I know there's some certain supplements I need to prioritize as magnesium and essential amino acids because I struggle to hit my protein goal every day, and so I'm taking that. And then there's essential fatty acids which you can get from fish, but I'm not eating fish every day with good quality. So but then you hear about, I need to take mitochondria supplements and all this different stuff, and then the spermidine, and then the what was the other thing I just got? I don't know. So the list goes on that it's like, oh, I don't want to take
yeah.
20, 50 different kinds. And I feel that we're not getting it, absorbing into our cells anyway. So
So it's not what you take in, it's what your microbes absorb. That makes a
yeah.
huge change too. And I think you're right. Like I think today with Instagram, all the media stuff, everybody is saying you should take this, you should take that. But I think we all need to take a good look at our own body and our own digestion. If we are poorly absorbing food, we're going to poorly absorb supplements. It's going down the same detoxification pathways. So it's good to kind of just, that's why I have a very hard time telling on social media, oh, everyone should take this supplement. It just feels irresponsible because
Mhm.
how do I know what Debbie needs? I don't. I
Mhm.
mean, I could say I love taking magnesium every day, magnesium glycinate at night, magnesium citrate if I'm traveling. I can say I love omega 3s, because there's research, solid research behind some of these things. Or, but beyond that, it becomes a very personal where you talk to your practitioner or your coach or anyone and look at studies. And I think that's something that I always tell my clients. Just don't believe somebody's version of it. You look at PubMed, you look at the studies available, look at brands that are well studied and doesn't, some of these brands have like fillers and things like that. And I've had clients who've come to me and who felt worse after being on a supplement because some of them have gluten, they have dairy, they have fillers, and that could affect your body as well. So it's so multifactorial. So
Mhm. How with aging, I know you focus the women, but the anything with the men, how our microbiome changes with our hormones changing and any other factors that impact our gut health as
yeah,
we age?
definitely the microbiome changes as we age. And the microbiome is actually in our gut, we have many bacteria called the estrobolome, and their whole job is to detox estrogen. As our estrogen tanks in menopause, there are other things in the same detoxification pathway. We could be recirculating as xenoestrogens, coming from plastics and
Mm.
chemicals and things like that. So we have to be really careful. When I look at the microbiome test, some of my clients who are coming in have really high estrogen recycling going on, and that leads to obesity, belly fat, especially. Most menopausal women complain about visceral fat. So I always kind of look beyond, oh, it's kind of not very hot to have visceral fat, is what they're thinking. And which
Mm-hmm.
is true. I mean, it's a personal thing, right? And nobody wants belly fat, but it's dangerous because it's metabolically active. So
Mm.
we try our best to bring that visceral fat down and really kind of showing, addressing that one of the reasons the visceral fat could be increasing is because the threshold for subcutaneous fat is kind of hit a max. And so it's kind of shifting into the viscera. So that kind of, changes can happen with age. And older people, older men and women, we all have like 4 or 5 phyla in our bacteria, like the modern Western world, but the ratio in which they appear keeps changing, and that could be based on how you feed your microbiome, age, hormonal, just so many different things. And people who are a little bit older, their firmicutes, bacteroidetes ratios can change based because they're not eating the kind of foods that they were perhaps eating when they were younger. They're not chewing properly. They're not eating a lot of veggies, because fiber comes only from the plant kingdom. And yeah, so it can change, and that affects immune health, it affects cardiovascular health, it affects every aspect of a person's well-being.
Is the role of the liver detoxification of estrogen involved in that too, in your findings?
Yes, I mean, it is, they're all connected, and definitely the liver is the detoxification pathway for all the toxins we take in the world. The one big conversation I have is alcohol because
Mhm.
the microbes don't like it, nor does the liver. It is too much, it's an acute toxin. And I'm so glad that finally doctors and practitioners are saying it aloud and saying cut down on the alcohol. It's taken
Mhm.
time, but I think more and more people are addressing it. So that's great, I think. Yeah.
I have a client that always says, well, in Europe, they have wine every night or a bottle of wine per person. Why can they have good quality, long lives if they're drinking alcohol every night?
Yeah, and I would counter that argument with this. When you look at Italians, for example, they have always have like a homegrown wine or they have, harvested, but have you seen their food? They eat tons and tons of greens, especially rocket greens, like the arugula, that's a bitter
Arugula. Yeah.
green, which is so good for liver detoxification. So whatever little damage that alcohol could be doing, it is also protected, and these high plant sources of food and flavonoids and polyphenols are really, really helping with mitigate that. So
Mhm.
it's important, like here on a standard American diet, if you're doing heavily ultra processed foods, artificial sweeteners, artificial sugars, um, more of a sedentary lifestyle, all of that, and add the alcohol, that's a
Mhm.
disaster. That's a perfect storm.
How does alcohol impact the microbiome bacteria? Does it kill them?
Yeah, it just basically you start getting having an imbalance in the gut. There's more of certain pathogenic bacteria that grow in
Mhm.
the gut, and mainly because the beneficial bacteria really recognize food as anything with fiber. So if we're not eating enough fiber, you know, the microbes are starved. So there's imbalance in the gut,
Mhm.
and that imbalance leads to many things like intestinal permeability. It can lead to these endotoxins entering your bloodstream and causing that systemic inflammation. So it's basically, Debbie, the way I look at it is like if you and I went to Home Depot and uh, really looking for food, what would we find? Like screws and things like that, right? That's pretty much what our microbes are going through. What they recognize as food is not what they're getting.
Mhm.
So that balance is completely short just because of that, you know.
I'm visualizing the bad bacteria are having a party, drinking alcohol, and they're drunk and they're causing havoc on our system.
It definitely, that's why I think it's not, I personally don't think it's a great thing to just focus on the pathogens. It's better to focus on the beneficial bacteria
Mhm.
and say,
Outnumbered.
I want to grow them so they can outnumber the bad guys.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
it feels, I mean, how many pathogens are you going to go after?
Mhm.
Instead, if you start slowly changing your diet and add a lot of prebiotic fibers and probiotics and fermented foods and things like that, um, I think this kind of a diet approach helps most people. I
Mhm.
mean, regardless of what your, mantra, what your idea is, what food camp you belong to, because we all belong to I'm a carnivore, I'm a vegan, I am this. I think it's just a matter of eat what you want, make your palate happy if that's what makes your gut or make your body feel good, but eat all of these other things for your microbes.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I do agree. So I was trying to do a video the other day that I'm not carnivore, I'm not paleo, I'm not keto. I changed the name of the podcast for years as low carb athlete, but that I was just really wanted to say eat real food. But there's,
Mhm.
you know, eat real food that balances your blood sugar that comes from nature. And as I get older, I'm focused on prioritizing protein and listening to all the research that we need around, as Dr. Gabrielle Lyon talks about, the 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. And women middle age and above, we need to double that to stimulate
Yeah.
muscle protein synthesis to avoid muscle loss, sarcopenia. And so doing 20, 30 grams at once is not stimulating my muscle protein synthesis. So
Yeah.
does that mean I'm carnivore? No, it means I'm more protein forward and I do choose more animal based because I did the
Mhm.
research to calculate how many grams it and getting the whole essential amino acid
And which
profile with
is
the.
fine. Yeah. And I don't think I've come across any research that says one or the other. I've come across research that says people who just eat animal protein and do not eat the fiber.
Mhm.
There's what happens is when we eat, a diet that is low in fiber, our gut microbiome is not expecting, it's expecting fuel, right?
Mhm.
And most of the protein is digested in the upper digestive tract.
Mhm.
But if you are eating way too much protein and you're not, yeah, and you're eating way too much protein or you're not digesting the protein, some
Mhm.
of it ends up in your colon.
Mhm.
The bacteria are going to say, okay, this is food, I suppose, I'm going to eat it. But the downside of that is not only is it producing some short chain fatty acids, it's also producing a lot of toxic metabolites like hydrogen sulfide, like
Yeah.
ammonia, things like that. And that's not good for us. So what research is saying is eat your protein, whatever it is, animal or plant, but just have all that fuel for your gut, increase the fiber. I mean, I had a client who was carnivore and she really had struggled with her bowel movements. She was really not feeling that great, but she kind of bought into that. And also I think a lot of these plant sources she couldn't digest because she had been on restrictive diets for so long. She was on a standard American diet. She had
Mhm.
lost a lot of the gut bacteria. So someone like that, first of all, is not a very good fit for me if they are so they're
Annoying.
rigid, if they're
Mhm.
rigid on that. But this woman was more like, hey, I tried it because I didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
And so even for someone like that, it's just a slow reintroduction of fiber,
Mhm.
and really kind of teaching them about the microbiome and the power it has. And it's not just it's something that's actively affecting our life. So it makes sense. I was on a podcast the other day, and the host was a carnivore.
Mhm.
And he said there are people in his society or in his community who will not even talk to someone who is not a carnivore. I find this really
Yeah,
troubling
I know
because
that. Yeah.
if we don't have conversations, how are we going to learn from each other? I want to know, is there any solid science behind a carnivore diet? I would love to know more, because I don't believe that there's one diet for everybody.
Mhm.
It doesn't make sense. I mean, like you said, you thrive on more protein. Someone else may not because if they're not able to digest the protein, it needs to be a slow amping up of the protein for that person. So,
Yeah, so let's see, I had so many thoughts in there that I think that yes, it is N equals one experiment. Proper digestion is key. I think a lot of people went to keto, went to carnivore, and trying to find their way. And I find it goes back to chronic stress impacts everything in the role of the vagus nerve
mm,
and proper digestion for proper elimination. And in between is feeding the microbiome. So if we don't have our body properly breaking down the proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, we're going to have a problem whatever food you're eating. And if you're eating in a stress state, but really understanding the role of the microbiome, I think people don't really know about it. And so fiber, I've been in this space for so long that it was all got into keto, paleo, well, actually zone diet when I started. The zone diet, and then it was paleo,
Atkins,
yeah,
Atkins.
Atkins, paleo, and then keto, and then into carnivore more recently and ketovore, combining it. But the point I want to make is that I think the conversation of fiber gets confusing and people don't know about, as you said, carnivore, even though some people would argue that's how ancestral health was. They just ate meat, but they depends on what part of the world they were living, right? So if they were just in maybe Iceland,
Mhm,
they didn't have vegetables and fruit and
mhm.
vegetables, and versus if you, so I always like to look at where your
Yeah, and
ancestors
they also didn't
went.
have the modern crap, you
Yeah,
know.
no, no, but I'm just meaning with the carnivore people that are strict
Yeah, yeah.
carnivore, they
Mhm.
don't eat it. They swear that, all you need to eat is this. But so there's more research. And I know Karan of Microbiome Labs of the Biome FX test, he was on my show like 10 years ago and we talked about all this. And over the years, what has changed with the microbiome, it will be interesting to see what changes if people that have been strict carnivore for a long
Yeah.
time, what does their gut look like? because the conversation is, do I need to add in fiber? Or what I'm finding is I need to get prebiotic foods that are going to feed my probiotics, the good bacteria, just as eating or taking fertilizer to feed my yard to get the plants to grow, because they need to have minerals, they need the prebiotics to help flourish.
Yeah.
So I think that is just ongoing research, I'm sure, is being done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I spent about 3 years researching my book. And the one thing that came up, every research is up your fiber. And fiber, like you said, is very confusing to people. Fiber is not your grandmother's little, it's way
Metamucil.
more metamucil, it's way more than that, and prebiotic fibers, like you said, really play a role. Changing up the fibers is really important. And fiber can come like in the book, I propose a diet that is feeding the microbiome, you know, how you feed yourself, what your macros are is completely your choice. But
Mhm.
what the feeding the microbiome is based on the research that I've come across, and a lot of it is plant sources, the microbiome does not care what kind of meat you eat because that is not a fuel that it uses,
True.
basically because of that, because by the time the food gets to the colon, the protein is done in, it's digested. So maybe it's evolved to be eating a lot more fibrous foods. It's very interesting, but upping your fiber is important for overall health. And there are too many studies to say that doesn't exist. It doesn't make sense. I mean, you can't just back away from the science behind it. Yeah.
What would your thoughts be argument to anti-nutrients? The phytates, oxalates, FODMAPs, lectins, because that's a whole discussion of plant toxins and plants bind to minerals and to rob them out from your body.
Well, I do agree that plants do have anti-nutrients, but for the most part, all the research is showing us that it all depends on how you cook it. You
Yeah.
cook it, most of the phytic acid and lectins are all gone. And nobody is going to have a bean that is hard and with a hard outer shell. In fact, I do an entire lesson just on how to cook beans, how to
Mhm.
support it with phenolic compounds to help digest the beans, because it's the beans are like a superfood for the gut, so you're eating it for them if it's not for you. So, and of course, soluble fiber and insoluble fiber are both important, but for how many people have cholesterol issues, high ApoBs, and LDLs and things like that. Definitely fiber is such a needle mover. So if we are able to up our fiber, really helps, transport that, pull away that cholesterol, the bloodstream. So.
It's so I always think of, is it really fiber that what we should focus on, or is it more that we need to focus on the prebiotic type of fiber to feed the bacteria?
Well, not all fibers are prebiotic. So
Mhm.
I would say prebiotic fiber is what we should be, because prebiotic fibers increase your microbial diversity. So things like, for example, if you started a foundation layer, it's all your veggies and fruits, the skin. The skin of the fruit or the vegetable has more insoluble fiber, but the soluble fiber is the kind that can, um, you know, you could mix in water and it makes this viscous kind of thing. So that could be like psyllium husk, great for cardiovascular health. If you're struggling with gut motility, you're backed up, then insoluble fiber is really, really good because it's high and it bulks up the stool. And things like red onion, leeks, and Jerusalem artichoke, those are all great prebiotic fibers, inulin, things like that. And a lot of them have sugars, oligosaccharides that can be a little bit daunting for someone on a low FODMAP diet. So I would say someone with SIBO or IBS to go very slow. start with low FODMAP diets and slowly get to after their treatment and really kind of get a good handle on it before they get to medium FODMAPs.
Mm. So, what type of foods do you suggest to experiment with to help improve our microbiome, pre and the probiotics?
Uh,
Read your
well,
book.
I well, no, I mean, I would say it's not one food. The first
Yeah.
thing I would say is have a diversity of plant materials. So if you went to Whole Foods today, Debbie, and you bought the same broccoli, the same carrots, the same, I would say change it up. Next week, go
Mhm.
to a Chinese market, have something else, maybe a Chinese broccoli or different greens. The microbiome really loves diversity. So if we can respect that and just change up our diet, it really does make a difference.
I
And you
think
don't
so
need
many
a
people,
lot of it. Yeah.
yeah, but I was just going to throw in so many people eat the same food every day. They don't
Yeah.
rotate.
Yeah, I think it's human nature, we're kind of mono eaters. We're just kind of stuck and of course everything boils down to convenience leads to consistency. And that's a big part of what I do is I feel like it's great to have goals, but without a system to support the goal, even if you make a goal today saying I'm going to have 40 grams of fiber per day, it's not going to happen because in about 3, 4 days, let's say you have a really hectic schedule, that same part of the brain that is saying 40 grams of fiber is struggling with so many other decisions. This is not going to be priority anymore. So, in order for that to happen day in and day until it becomes procedural, like brushing your teeth, it's very important to have a system in place. And that's pretty much what I offer in the book.
I know Paul Chek, he actually lives somewhere over here, but I did his program years ago, Holistic Lifestyle Coach, and his book, what's it called? I forget what it's called, but it was a great book. And it was always about, 4-day rotation diets. What he always suggested in their programs is, don't eat the same food for 4 days, basically.
Yeah.
Just keep it simple, but having more variety. And then Dr. Wild, or gosh, brain does not work this time of day. What's her name? Walls, Dr. Walls, who had
Oh, Terry Walls. Yeah.
MS, Terry
Yeah.
Walls, and she always promotes eating, 100 different vegetables a week. And I think it's just, I find it hard to do all that. I'd rather just give me, a
And
shake mix.
well, see again, if you have like a shake, then you're really cutting down on oral tolerance, because
Yeah.
everything starts in the mouth, everything starts with
Mhm.
chewing. And if you're just having smoothies and things like that, you're really cutting down on that oral tolerance. And I think that's one of the big reasons today, Debbie, that we have so many food intolerances.
Mm.
Everyone's saying, I can't eat this, I can't eat that, but instead, if we start chewing our food and just be really mindful in how we're kind of absorbing the nutrients
Mm.
from a certain food and kind of slowly add things. And that's the reason I said I have a system and a format. So one of the things that I do is think, okay, you want to have greens every day. You want to have some beans, lentils, or some fermented foods like sauerkraut. You're not going to remember to add all of this to your salad. So I kind of come up with a formula on how to add that. Add a little
Mm.
bit of this, add a little bit of that. So every week you change up those ingredients. So when you go shopping and you prep, you're getting ready to do that. So that really does help because if not, you're right. It's so hard to remember to add all of these things, plus jobs and other responsibilities for us. It can be very challenging. Yeah.
It's probably good to have that meal delivery service with a flying apron or whatever it's called that comes with all the ingredients and just make this meal. Or
Yeah.
someone ideally makes it for you.
But it's so much easier now, I think, because you get these chopped salads, you get all of these already chopped veggies. So it's just a
Mhm.
matter of putting together, like, let's say we start with like a base of greens, and then you add some cabbage, it's cruciferous veggies. You can buy chopped cabbage in the store. You add that, you add some red onions. You can get that chopped. You don't have to cut it and cry. And, red
Yeah.
onions are great. They're really high in prebiotic. Add
Mm.
some things like avocado, good fats, and if you can tolerate beans, you can add some cooked beans. Eden Foods is a great brand that I like. They
Hmm.
they don't have that BPS and BPA stuff going on in a lot of canned foods, or buy them in bags, and just it's a matter of just throwing a little bit of chickpeas or black beans for your gut microbiome. Find an animal protein that you like, add it into that. Make a good dressing, especially something with vinegar that keeps your blood sugar nice and stable. And this is
Hmm.
something that research is showing us, that apple cider vinegar actually keeps your blood sugar stable. So not just
Hmm.
drinking it directly like a lot of people do straight up, and
Yeah, I
ruin
don't
your
know how to do
entire day
that.
out. I don't know how
Yeah.
you do that either. And then just make a beautiful salad dressing. And
It's
I'm
good.
talking a big volumetric salad with all of your macros and micros. And
Hmm.
so you're feeding your gut, you're making sure your muscles are healthy, you have all of the components of a healthy diet for you. And within that, it all depends on your bio individuality.
Yeah. I will say I used to be the salad queen and eat salad galore, but since I started eating more meat, and that was since like 2019, I started eating red meat for my first time since I was like 7 years old.
Hmm.
And I reintroduced it. I felt good. I'm not eating all sorts of meat, but I I feel full and satiated, have no cravings when unique Debbie Potts here, eats more of a meat base. When I eat salad, I'm still hungry and
Of
satiated. So
course.
for me, I have to add that 40, 50 grams with a vegetable because I will still be hungry if I just have the vegetables. That's why, you're talking same thing, like having the essential fatty acids on it, using essential olive oil,
Yeah.
the avocado. But I used to not eat protein and eat all vegetables, but I was always hungry.
Yeah. And I think people are just so caught up with this protein.
All or
I
none.
mean, we have to respect their protein has such an incredible role to play in our life, in our health. And what you choose as a protein is totally up to you. If you have never eaten meat, and this poor person is said, you've got to have 100 grams of protein coming from animals, he or she's going to be a mess because the body doesn't know how to deal with it. It just kind of really looked to themselves to get the carnitine and all of that for
Mhm.
muscle synthesis. And all of a sudden they're like flummoxed and like, what do I do with all of this? And they have so many health issues and gut issues. Same
Mhm.
thing like the low FODMAP diet. So everything becomes like you're unique, your body is unique, how you absorb food is unique. We just need to respect that and just go
Mhm.
from there, I think.
Yeah. I must say, when I started eating red meat, 2019, it took me a year to properly digest it. So I'd have
Yeah.
it, and I tried I think it was roast beef, and
Mhm.
I was did not do well digesting it. I'll just say that. It's just
Yeah,
too,
and like certain people are anemic, right? And there's
yeah,
this
me too.
big talk about heme iron, non-heme iron. Again, that becomes very individual. There are certain people who do great on non-heme iron,
Mm.
especially if they have cardiovascular issues. There are
Yeah.
some people who really need animal protein. They're not able to digest the non-heme. And someone like that, in fact, I had one client say, I told one client, I think you may do really well with organ meats, and she was like, do you want me to puke? She wasn't too happy with my suggestion, but I feel like, show them the studies, give them the literature, let them make the choice, because they
Hmm.
know their bodies really well. I don't have to make that decision for them.
Yeah, I did a video taking organ capsules. This where you take a Sharpie pen and cross off the organ word. So you just don't know what you're having and
Yeah, it
just
is.
forget about
It's
it.
very few people can stomach that. It's crazy. Yeah. So Debbie, I think I heard you say that you take amino acids. Um, is there something is it like a capsule? Is it a supplement that you take?
I don't do well with sweeteners, stevia stuff. So you can drink them, but I get essential amino acids from Kion, Kion.
Mhm.
I also like Body Health essential amino acids.
As those are the pills, right? Yeah. I
Yeah.
just started on that just as an experiment. I'm trying the super amino 23.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I I've been trying to take them in the morning. I have to leave them on my counter so before I go to the gym, and then
Mhm.
evening time before bed to help with muscle repair and recovery.
Yeah.
And
I am doing that as an experiment, and I'm also trying it on a few people in my clients who are have type 2 diabetes. And what I've found is that adding that protein in the morning with your first meal really brings your blood sugar down
yeah, interesting.
because your beta cells are destroyed. By the time you're
Hmm.
type 2 diabetes, and you have type 2 diabetes, that happens. So it's really interesting how that protein makes such a huge difference to the morning meal. It's just yeah.
Interesting. Yeah,
And
good.
these are people who cannot handle a lot of protein. So the amino acids, the super aminos are really great for people like that, just
Well, yeah, because most people can't digest a
yeah,
protein properly. That's why I was to watch out for people that if you're eating a high protein diet, just, you know, you gotta often people have low stomach acid or they've elevated
yeah.
H. pylori that they can't break it down. So having it kind of
Or kidney
pre-digested.
issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So I know we're running out of time, but I would love to read your book. And where can people find it when it comes out?
Where all books are sold. It's also going to be on my website, ninearmsofwellness.com. And yeah, that's where they can find it. And it's available right now for pre-order.
Good. Yeah, I
Mm.
think it's a huge area that, you obviously are passionate about it. And I think it's just continuous research. You'll have to keep updating it.
Oh my
Keep going.
gosh. Tell me about it. Already, my editor's going crazy. She said, "How many changes are you going to make?" I said, "Well, the research changed a little bit. I want to change
I know it's just so
that."
such a new area, but there's
Yeah.
so many areas to focus on too. So I'm sure you can write part two, part three, and
That's
so much
right.
more to
Yeah.
go. So I appreciate you diving into that research and tackling
Mhm.
it for
Thank
us. And hopefully I'll read the book and bring you back on the
mhm.
show to dive into all my follow-up
Thank
questions.
you. Thank you. This was a pleasure. Yeah, it was really fun. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.